And welcome to the ATP Project for another week. You're with your hosts, Steve and Elisma. And we are going to be talking about the one... No, I can't say that. We're going to be talking about the MTHFR gene, which is the Methylenetetrahydrofolate Reductase gene. The last time we're going to say that long word because we'll run out of time.
That's right.
It's going to be called MTHFR gene. Now, why is this so important? It's actually a little polymorphism, which is a little alteration in the genes. And some people have this polymorphism, some people don't. I've got papers here, 30, 40%, but quite a significant number of people have this thing. And we sort of, it's put out there as being something that could be problematic. And we're going to tell you today, yes, it certainly could be problematic. And there are actually some negative effects. There's quite some serious ones, actually. And then there's some effects where it can actually have a positive effect on you, which is rare. But that's why these genes survive, because if we think of the process of evolution, if a gene turned out to be really bad, then that gene would just simply die off. So this gene, like all genes, have some sort of positive and some sort of negative effects in the body. Now, I know there's a great book that you work with, Ben Lynch, who talks about dirty genes. And you talked to me, mentioned it before, and I want you to tell everyone out there about the layers of genes and epigenetics, and we want to explain what epigenetics is too. That's an interesting one.
Yeah. So, if you guys are really interested in it, it's called Dirty Genes, Dr. Ben Lynch's book. And it's very much, you have to kind of like look at genes from a layer perspective. Not everything is about your polymorphisms or your genetic, I don't even like to use the word mutation. So polymorphism is just a change in the gene's function, right? So your genes is like one layer. And then on top of that is your nutrition. So your diet is the layer on top. Are you getting the right nutrients in to make these enzymes that these genes encode for work well?
Yes.
And then another layer would be environmental exposure. Like, are you being exposed to toxins or stress or infections or whatever? That could also change the function of these enzymes. And so you got to look at all of those layers when you have symptoms of possible dysfunction in any of these genes. So it's not just all about the genes. And you're right, Steve. It's a lot of the gene mutations are it changed for specific reasons at specific times.
Absolutely. So I mean, people are familiar with this, possibly to do with pregnancy, and it's to do what does MTHFR does? It activates folic acid. Is that what it does in the body?
No. Well, not. Folic acid, yes, it can. So, but it's in general, MTHFR is needed to process folates from our diet that gets absorbed from the digestive tract into the active form of 5-methyltetrahydrofolate.
Yep.
And then that active form can then go on and do a whole bunch of other functions to do with mental health, to do with estrogen metabolism, all of those kinds of things. Now, it can process synthetic folic acid, but there are issues with synthetic folic acid in terms of I guess how well it gets metabolized into this active form, and also how it can interfere with natural food folate absorption as well. But that's essentially what it does. Right,
because I want a bit of homework here for people listening, and that is to go back, look at your multivitamin, and look at the bottle, and look for folic acid on there. And if it's on there, be very cautious about that, because there are some side effects of having too much folic acid. Now, when I was studying in 1847, we were told that folic acid...
1847.
When I was studying millions of years ago, we were taught folic acid, that's vitamin B9, and the old gag was in the old days where it should have been called vitamin B4 because you're supposed to have it before you fall pregnant. Yeah, that was the joke. It's a terrible joke, but it's the way you remember what it did. Yeah. And it's something to do with pregnancy. And now we know that, of course, that too much folic acid can be problematic. And you might be thinking, well, I don't take folic acid. But what if you eat a bowl of cereal? What happens then?
Oh, well, all those processed foods, are heavily fortified with synthetic folic acid.
Right.
So this is what people need to know. Like if they see, like the word folate is a broad description of folic acid or any other type of folate. So even if it says folate, you don't know if it's synthetic or if it's natural. And the natural forms are things like your folinic acid and your 5-methyltetrahydrofolate, right? So any kind of folate that you get from food has to kind of like be absorbed from the digestive system. It has to be first metabolized, then absorbed, then it binds to folate receptors. it gets into the cells and all of that. So if you get a lot of synthetic folic acid in your diet from things like cereals and breads and all those fortified processed foods, then that folic acid sits on the receptor sites and it prevents natural folates from binding to those receptor sites and getting absorbed into the body. And there was also if I can show people, because this is the folate pathway, but MTHFR is right at the bottom, right? Yeah. But see how many other genes are involved in the folate metabolism. And this one here is specifically very important, DHFR, right? So DHFR is the first enzyme when folate gets into the cell that now has to process folate into tetrahydrofolate. And then it continues along until it reaches MTHFR. Now, our DHFR activity, humans, it's very low. It's only 2% of rats' DHFR activity.
Wow, didn't know that.
Right, so it's only 2%. So we don't really have a very fast DHFR activity in general. And so what they found is if you flood it with synthetic folic acid, it can actually, you end up with a lot of unmetabolized folic acid in the bloodstream, and it kind of binds to the DHFR or the dihydrofolate reductase.
Yep, that's
enzyme.
Yep.
It's taking it away from processing natural folates. So it can slow it down even further. So there was a couple of research articles that I looked at where they were that flooding with synthetic folic acid is actually can be problematic in some people.
Oh, very much so. There's a big review paper I've got right in front of me, European Journal of Clinical Nutrition, that's titled, you're going to love this, The Adverse Effects of Excessive Folic Acid Intake. Now, you've got to remember that folic acid's found in all your processed foods and all that sort of thing. But if you went to a GP, and I don't want to label them all with the same brush, there is a pill they give to all people who want to fall pregnant called Megafol, and that's 5 milligrams, 5,000 micrograms of folic acid. You can get it from a pharmacy. It's not a prescription. It's an S3, so you can get it from the pharmacist, which is an astronomically high amount of folic acid. And I'm going to say folic acid, not methyltetrahydrofolate, folic acid. And you're right about those papers. The reason why they give it is because it prevents neural tube defects, is the theory behind it. But what they've found, this was published just recently from India, and what they found is that if you have high levels of folic acid, it also has negative effects on the fetus besides its protective effects against neural tube defects. So it has negative effects on babies growing. So even though they're giving this vitamin for kids to prevent one of the diseases in children, neural tube defects. That's a bad disease, by the way. You don't want to get that. No. But it also causes other problems in babies. So the problem is that if a doctor is giving that to someone to help the baby, it could be hindering the baby.
Absolutely, because synthetic folic acid can actually slow down MTHFR function even more. So if a woman takes large doses of synthetic folic acid, during pregnancy, it'll slow down her MTHFR gene and her babies as well. If the baby, got a gene from mum and a gene from dad and all of that, so it slows that down, and we know that it's involved in growth and cellular division and all of those kinds of things.
Absolutely. And amazingly, now we've got to be careful. There's lots of different forms of folates, as you said. There's folic acid, and then there's other folates. Now, folate comes from the word foliage, which in other words, it's found rich in these plant-based source things. So if you're eating lots of fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds, even beans, it's quite high in, and those sorts of things. We're not talking about that being bad for us, are we?
No, we're not talking about that. No. Beans is a little bit of not bad, but with beans, the folate is a little bit less bioavailable due to lectins and things like that in beans. But that's the good forms of folate. And in fact, if you look at the food forms of folate, it is your tetrahydrofolates and your dihydrofolates. That's the active food forms of folate that we get in our fruits and vegetables, which are very easily assimilated and absorbed.
Incredible. And let's say the child grows up and unfortunately develops epilepsy and they go on antiepileptic drugs. If they're given folic acid with antiepileptic drugs, it causes huge interactions and really quite dangerous interactions in the brain. And what it does is it slows down the detoxification of drugs like phenobarb, which is a barbiturate. Now, barbiturates are highly, They're not so widely used these days. They're used for things like delirium tremors, but they used to be used quite widely even for sleeping tablets. And for addictive personalities, we know famous, being a muso myself, I remember Keith Moon was famously given phenobarbiturates to get off all the drugs he was on. So he took an overdose of barbiturates and died of the barbiturates.
Wow.
So that's Keith Moon, the drummer of The Who. So these are dangerous drugs. They've got what they call a very therapeutic window. They've got to be kept in very narrow levels in the blood. So you don't want someone taking folic acid, which is considered like, it's in my multivitamin, stuffing up the drug regime and causing huge side effects for kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, there was like, it's actually like synthetic folic acid is actually a known contraindication in individuals experiencing cerebral folate deficiency and who have a TCN2 variant, which is a B12
B12 absorption problem,
right? Because it causes issues there. So this is a known contraindication. People with those issues, should not be having synthetic folic acid. So there are definitely huge issues with it. And it is pretty much in all the synthetic multivitamins out there.
Yeah.
So it is very important for people to kind of like really look at how much synthetic folic acid they get.
It's probably in your cereal for breakfast too, and your bread for lunch.
Bread,
It's just fortified for you, which is absolutely horrendous. And I mean,
the donut, the 1 kilogram donut, it's going to have quite a bit of synthetic folic acid
because
in it too.
they call it enriched flour, and I love that term, enriched flour. So what do you mean by a kilo donut? Who's going to be eating a kilo donut?
Well,
someone might.
That's right. I think someone in this room is going to have a kilogram.
It's not me, is it? It's not you,
no,
is it?
It's not us.
Someone else in this room. That's amazing. I'm going to bet on. I'm going to bet on Brooklyn being able to eat a kilo donut.
Yeah, but she's going to flood her folate receptor antibody, folate receptors with synthetic folic acid.
Don't get pregnant after that, Brooklyn. No. Imagine after eating a kilogram donut, you'd be like, I feel pregnant, but it's going to be nasty. It's going to be nasty.
That's right.
So you've talked about folate now. What happens if we have and we'll call it the polymorphism in these genes? There's two different types. It's a 677 allele and a 1298 allele. So there's two different, we'll call them flavors in the donut thing. Variants of these things. Now, what they basically call is if those things are problematic, then you get a reduction in dopamine, a reduction in norepinephrine, and a reduction in serotonin.
Yep.
Now, they're all what we call neurotransmitters, chemicals in the brain, and that leads to all sorts of diseases in the brain. One of the ones in the paper here we're going to talk about is, of course, autism. There was a big meta-analysis done here on the alleles, and what it found was basically that if you have a polymorphism, you are very susceptible to having autism. It's the 677 allele can be a risk factor for autism. Now, of course, autism is that terrible childhood disease that we don't know what's going on.
And I think that's such a good study, Steve. And I think I want to, it's good to clarify that, especially when it comes to autism, which is such a, I guess, a sensitive topic, there is no one gene that causes autism. So when we're talking about the MTHFR gene, that gene polymorphism has been around forever, right? Yeah. But it has so many functions. Like that's just the starting point of biochemistry. And one of those biochemical cycles is methylation, which is involved in detoxification. Mm-hmm. So there's other reasons beyond the gene that would make kids or people more susceptible to developing autism, which is a whole another topic for another day.
It is, yeah.
But so that already will kind of like compromise the gene, and then all the functions that results from that, such as neurological function. You mentioned like the dopamine, the serotonin, and all of that, and also detoxification, because we need MTHFR. It's a starting point of making glutathione, in our whole detoxification pathway. So there's all of these consequences if you have a slow MTHFR gene or enzyme function.
It's amazing because, remember, these guys, the chief prescription for someone like autism or ADHD, a common one is an amphetamine, dexamphetamines, which drive that dopaminergic pathway up to boost those levels up. Getting rid of folic acid out of the diet and giving them natural folates. Now, I want to talk about natural folates. What if someone was just eating a high dose of natural folates out of fruits and vegetables and all those healthy foods? Does this gene become a little less relevant to their health?
Well, it becomes less problematic. So when you are born with a gene polymorphism, I always explain a little bit like a road. So if you have no gene polymorphisms, you're pretty much atypical.
Yep.
Then it's like you've got this big highway and you can just drive as fast as you want because you're the only car on the road.
Yep, good.
If you've got one variant, so one like a heterozygous polymorphism, that road becomes a little bit narrower. And if you're homozygous, which means you've got two mutations, two variants, then the road becomes really narrow.
Yeah.
That's what you're born with.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean, though, that that's how it needs to be. So the synthetic folic acid, for instance, is like, let's say, so if you have just a narrow road and you have synthetic folic acid, it means there's more cars on that road.
Right.
And then that's going to slow it down even more. So that's why you want to clean up your diet and get rid of the synthetic folic acid. So by eating folate foods, folate-rich foods, you're taking cars off the road.
Yes.
And you're allowing that gene to work better or that enzyme to work better.
Right.
So it makes a huge difference just by cleaning up the diet.
Cleaning up the diet. And unfortunately, and what we find in studies is that autistic children tend to eat more processed foods. They have more gut problems. We're going to get onto the gut thing in a sec, but getting into the more adult thing, if people with these MTHFR polymorphism also end up with higher levels of a chemical in the bloodstream called homocysteine. Now, homocysteine is a risk factor for dementias and heart disease. And this paper here, the next paper we'll talk about here in Brain Sciences, talks about it being a problem for people getting into strokes and heart disease, a higher risk factor if you've got these polymorphisms. And it's to do with the toxicity associated with the high levels of homocysteine. What I loved about this paper was it actually found that the population, and this is why people listening, or I'll come up with those, about a third of people have it, 38% have a 677 allele problem and 40.3% have the 1298 allele problem. And that was this paper published July 2020. So that's almost half the people have one of these polymorphisms, and if you got them both, it's about 20% of the population, 1 in 5.
But we all have problems, though, do we?
Exactly. And so if you're ingesting not folic acid, but the 5-methyltetrahydrofolate, you sort of can get around those problems, I guess. So isn't that incredible that if you can sort of test for this, you now know that you're more at a risk factor of, say, developing heart disease. And by knowing that, and you want to do something about it, you can say, well, I'm going to give up the fags, I'm going to do all the normal things, but I'm going to take particular health care of my heart. And so that's why I think this could be useful. Now, there are tests for the methyltetrahydrofolate reductase gene, isn't there? They're pretty common. Do you know much about that? I don't know a lot about that.
Yeah. So in general, a lot of even doctors can test for it now. It's a simple blood test. So they all generally check for the two variants, the two MTHFR variants. You can also get more comprehensive gene tests. So for me, it's a little bit like, one gene in a sea of how many hundreds and thousands of genes. I don't think needs to be probably is not as relevant as looking at the combination of genes, right? We have to look at, even with this, we have to look at all the genes around the MTHFR gene, right? We can't just focus on that one, because if the ones before it doesn't work, well, it doesn't matter what MTHFR looks like. It's still not going to work, right? So then you kind of like look at more your broader genetic panels. Where they'll test for, 100 genes or however many genes. And there's quite a few companies out there who's doing it. What people have to realize, though, is there are differences between the companies, because there's so many different variants. So it'll depend on what variations the companies test for. Not everyone tests for the same variations. So a lot of companies will test for what I call nonsense genes, which means there's no research on it. So they found a variation, but it's like, so what?
So what?
You don't know what it means, right? So the quality of the testing that you choose becomes very important. So the companies that you test with and all of that.
Amazing. Now, you mentioned heterozygous and homozygous. Now, heterozygous means that you've got one polymorphism and the other gene is normal. Homozygous means you've got both of the same polymorphisms.
Yeah, because you've got to get one gene from mum and one gene from dad.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, we just have to explain that, because people go hetero what, homo what, and it's like, we just want to make sure of that. Now, I want to give you another disease that is another risk factor from Bioscience Reports 2020, and it shows that in the gene, the methyltetrahydrofolate reductase gene, polymorphism, has a higher risk of developing PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now, PCOS is a condition that a lot of women get, where you can get cysts on the ovaries, but it's associated with hyperandrogenism, too much testosterone in a woman. They get hirsutism, they get hairy faces a little bit, they get a midriff obesity around here. So it's quite a disturbing disease, causes terrible PMS and all those sorts of things. And what we now know is that there is a polymorphism associated with PCOS. And so, again, these people with PCOS maybe could get tested for this, and maybe one of the treatments could be activated folate to be able to bypass that gene. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what you think this, if someone's found positive MTHFR, say homozygous, so they got the two problems, what sort of treatments would you give someone who's homozygous for this particular gene?
Well, if you were homozygous and you were expressing it, which can, expressing genes can also be measured for, which is slightly different to DNA testing, and they had something like polycystic ovarian syndrome, then you would want to use your active folates. You want to use things like your 5-methyltetrahydrofolate, which you can find in activated B complexes or on its own. That would be the supplement that you want to use. And you wouldn't need to use huge doses like 5 milligrams, which is just...
That's ludicrous.
Astounding, yeah. So, it'll be anything from 500 micrograms to maybe 1,000 micrograms, depending on what's going on for you. But yeah, you'd want to be using something like that. But you may also want to use something like a supplement with riboflavin 5-phosphate in it, or vitamin B2. Yeah. Because especially with the C677T variety, when you have a gene polymorphism on that specific MTHFR variety, it changes the shape of MTHFR. So in MTHFR, we talk about the genes, but we have to remember the gene encodes for the enzyme. So it makes an enzyme, and the enzyme is what does all the work, right? And so if you have a polymorphism on that gene, because the gene's like the blueprint, it's like, okay, well, what's my house supposed to look like? Yes. But now there's a fault on the blueprint. Yes. So it makes a crooked house. Yes. Right? It changes the shape of the house. So now you have this wonky looking house.
Imagine.
And that wonky looking house, in terms of MTHFR, with that specific blueprint, it can't bind to its cofactor very well. And its cofactor is FAD, which is...
Oh, yeah, I don't remember that one either. FAD, the activated enzyme.
It's activated B2. I think it's B2. Flavin adenine dinucleotide.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I think you're right.
And that's vitamin B2. Yeah. So taking something like riboflavin or vitamin B2 can make that gene or that enzyme potentially work better. So there's a few nutrients you want to look at there, right? Magnesium features very big in here as well. So there's quite a few nutrients that you want to kind of get in, not necessarily just the 5-methyltetrahydrofolate.
And what are your thoughts on methylcobalamin in this case?
Yeah, so methylcobalamin...
it's B12.
That's vitamin B, exactly, activated vitamin B12. That could also be a really good one, especially if someone is getting in a lot of synthetic folic acid, because synthetic folic acid can also slow down TCN2, which is B12 absorption, right? So you can often get both B12 and folate issues with synthetic folic acid. And so, using something like methyl B12 with 5-methyltetrahydrofolate can be hugely beneficial. There's a small number of people who react to too many methyl nutrients, and they may want to use something like a hydroxocobalamin, which is more the natural food form that we get, right? And then the body can change it into whatever
it can do it once, after that. And then interesting because as I said, the reason why I like these sort of testings is you can innovate ways of treating this. Now, low carbohydrate diets, exercise, and all those things we've talked about in the past, the chromiums and all the getting rid of the sugars and all that is very good for PCOS, polycystic. We know the newer drug things here are using metformin, which is an extract of goat's rue. Actually, it's a synthetic form of goat's rue, the herb, which is used nowadays to treat PCOS. So this is another avenue we've got for this incredibly insidious disease that a lot of women have. And that could be because, well, not because of, but contributing towards this MTHFR gene problem.
Yeah. And if you think about it, Steve-O, it's like with polycystic ovarian syndrome, with, the insulin resistance and all of that, a lot of those women, not all of them, I don't want to put all women under one blanket, But a lot of them are eating a lot of processed foods. That's contributing to that insulin resistance and things like that, which will also contain a whole bunch of
folic acid. Yeah, I didn't think of that. Of course, because they're going to be, a lot of them are eating these heavily processed foods. And I remember in clinic, and you've done more clinic than I have, but the people who think they're eating well, are having those. I'm having cereal for breakfast with low-fat milk, and then I'm having a brown sandwich for lunch, and and it's sort of like I'm having wholemeal pasta for dinner. I'm thinking, holy mackerel! I mean, yes, the excessive refined carbohydrates, and we've talked about them till the cows come home, but the folic acid effects on that, because it's all, puffed up with I think it's only 4 B vitamins. It's folic acid, B1, B2, and B3. It's a weird sort of thing, and of course the synthetic forms of those. It's quite staggering. So that's a very interesting one. And now for men, if we have a polymorphism, we get higher rates of prostatic cancer.
Wow.
Yeah, great, eh? Can't wait. It's just like, that's a very common cancer in men.
Yeah.
And it's something to be aware of too, that this could be a contributing factor for it.
And then there's also like a bunch of, also some very common medications that can affect MTHFR function as well, right? So things like your non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which a lot of people use when they have pain, inflammation.
They do. Just to give you a background what they are, there's things like indomethacin, there's the COX-2 inhibitors such as Celebrex, there's Mobic, there's the old banned Vioxx. If people are still, some countries might be still using that one. I don't know. It's side effects of heart disease, etc. And aspirins as a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. And a lot of people are taking these drugs.
Yeah.
Naproxen, Voltaren, Feldene, all these sorts of anti-arthritic drugs that we take, and they do stuff up the folate metabolism.
Yeah, they do, as well as proton pump inhibitors. If we go back to digestion, we need a pH of about 5.5 in the digestive system for folate absorption to take place, right? So if you're using proton pump inhibitors, which is, it reduces the stomach acid, a lot of people with heartburn will take these medications. Well, that could potentially affect how well you absorb folate. And then that affects a whole bunch of other things. We kind of like broadly touched on gut health. It is important to know that there's a lot of bacteria, a lot of good, I don't want to say good because all bacteria has a purpose in the digestive system, but there are some commensal bacteria, lactobacillus species, that are involved in folate production. They can actually produce folate as well.
Make folates.
Right? So we can get it from our diet, but we can also have our little buddies, in our digestive system make it for us as well, right? And the 2 strains that are more specific is the Lactobacillus rhamnosus and the Lactobacillus plantarum strains. Specifically plantarum, though. So, good gut health can also be, apart from the absorption, can also be of benefit in terms of making MTHFR work better.
God, it's incredible. Because you mentioned the PPIs, the proton pump inhibitors. Now a proton is acid, okay? That's what it is. And proton pump inhibitors stop your stomach pumping out acid. And it's used for treating things like ulcers or GERD or gastroesophageal reflux. And that basically eliminates the acid in your stomach. So if you're on that, then your pH of your stomach, which should be about 1 or 2, rises up because the acid drops, the pH rises. That's how the pH works. It rises up above 6. And so you find it very difficult to absorb any of the folates. So you're going to be eating a healthy diet, but if you're on PPIs, you're probably not absorbing the folate.
That's right.
And that's just such a common medication.
Yeah, it's PPIs. A lot of people take it for many, many years. Even though I think the time frame, according to the instructions, is no longer than 6 weeks.
Oh no, you need stomach acid for many things, digestion and absorbing folate, but many things too. And by stopping that is nuts. Now there are other medications too, like sulfasalazine, which is a classic sulfur-based drug given for RA patients, rheumatoid arthritis patients, and that one stuffs your folate metabolism up too.
Yeah, you told me about that today. So that was one that I wasn't aware of.
No, I was on it for a few years, many years ago. when I had the arthritis.
You stuffed up your MTHFR.
I stuffed up lots of things back then, I'll tell you. Being a young muse, oh, God. No. Look, those, yeah, look, back then you just, you just did what the doctor said. And they probably didn't know about all this stuff back then. No. And, you can't blame them. And nowadays there is another common methotrexate, which is a drug that stuffs up folate metabolism as well. So there's lots of drugs around. So it's easy to stuff up your folate metabolism. It really, really is. So, it can be a real problem. I want to give you some good news, though.
Yes.
Because, for the last 30 minutes, we've given you bad news about...
Yeah, it sounds terrible.
Terrible.
If I have MTHFR, which I actually do...
Oh, do you? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've got the 1298C variety.
Well, I've got some good news for you.
Oh, great.
I've got some good news for you. I have got some good news. This is not a setup. I didn't know this, but I'm going to pull out a paper from the Journal of Sports Sciences 2013, and I'll read the title to you because it affects you. Association of the MTHFR 1298 allele polymorphism is associated with speed and strength sports in Russian and Polish athletes. Now, you're not Russian or Polish.
Not Russian or Polish.
That's what they tested on. They just tested them on those. But you're not going to believe this. I'm going to read the results here. The results of the presentation suggest that polymorphism is associated with athletic status.
Wow.
It means that you have, on average, you're going to love this, a 38.6% increase in strength athletes. So in strength, and you actually become a faster runner, 35.6% in sprint athletes. You have a higher speed of that. Now, isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
So
there's a lot of positives in that too, isn't
there?
it?
Yeah, so this has something to do with fast twitch muscle fibers. And so these people, you, have got probably more fast twitch fiber muscle. Now, I know you're a great distance athlete. I wonder...
used to be in my heyday.
You were still in your heyday.
You know what the reason for? I'm thinking what would be the reason for that, right? So this is the thing. Like within MTHFR and the folate pathway, it's actually very involved in making ATP for the mitochondria.
Adenosine triphosphate, that's energy.
Yeah, so I wonder if that could be the link here, right?
Yeah.
Because we need, if MTHFR slows down, which it will slow down with that variety, it allows for more folate to stay in the folate pathway to do other things like DNA replication and repair and stuff like that, but also in making purines, which includes adenine, which is the ingredient for adenine triphosphate, ATP.
Of course.
So I wonder if that could be the reason.
I wonder too. I mean, I didn't go any further than that. I just wanted to, end the podcast on a positive note. And it's a real positive note.
Yeah,
because being faster and being stronger these days, as far as survival is concerned, it's got, who cares? But back, when we're hunting and gathering, 20, 30,000 years ago, these polymorphisms were around then. These people would have been at an advantage, or you would have been at an advantage to hunt. I'd be running after the kangaroo, and you just sprint past me and get it and kill it and eat it before I even get there.
Yeah, or we run away from the lion.
Yep.
And what's the old saying? It's like you just have to be faster than the other guy. That's all. You don't have to get away from the lion.
When we were doing surf life-saving training again a million years ago, when we were taken out in the rubber ducky to the mile buoy marker, and you had to swim back. And this is in Melbourne, and so you swam a mile back from the marker, and it was sunset, so everyone's worried about sharks, and the coach would always say you don't have to outswim the shark, you just outswim the slowest swimmer. Right. So don't be the slowest swimmer. So we'd be bolting back, trying to sprint a mile. It really gave you a bit of adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
And so isn't that amazing that we've just picked on it. It causes all sorts of nasties, and we're all there's probably someone listening going, I think I'm positive. I'm going to kill myself. And then they find out they're stronger and faster.
And I want to add another positive, I think, on that one, right?
Go for
it. It's also thought, because they found that a lot of light-skinned people who live in hot countries like Italy and Australia and South Africa probably as well, have these polymorphisms, these MTHFR polymorphisms. And what they found is that when you have sun exposure, like you get sunburned, if you have a slower MTHFR, it kind of like it speeds up or it saves folate for making more new cells.
Right.
So it actually helps you to heal or recover from sunburn a lot quicker, right? So they reckon these polymorphisms were as a way for people to not get sunburned and then, be in pain for days on end, right? And so I just found that fascinating.
Yes.
And the other fascinating thing is like with sunburn as well, is it kind of speeds up another enzyme very close to MTHFR called SHMT. Now, by speeding up SHMT, it also speeds up that pathway of making more DNA, RNA, and new cells. So we found out that MTHFR polymorphisms potentially can make you stronger, faster, and recover better from sunburn, which is...
Now I want this polymorphism. I didn't a few minutes ago.
No, but that shows you, right? Like there's always positives and negatives. And you just have to make sure that, you keep those genes or enzymes working as well as you can by giving it the nutrients and not interfering with it with all kinds of drugs and synthetic nutrients and things like that.
So the take-home message, I mean, yes, you can get tested for this thing. And I know Medicare rebates it under certain circumstances, but okay, so this is one we can test for, and it's fairly well researched, this one. A lot of the other SNPs are not really well researched, but this one's got a lot of data on it. Unfortunately, I'm going to give the negative effects possibly outweigh the positive effects. But what you're saying is you can get by it, and you just got to get off the folic acid.
That's right. You just have to make sure there's no other cars on the road.
No other cars on the road. I love that analogy because having this sort of having a healthy diet is good for many reasons, and this is actually another very good reason to eat a lot of plant-based foods.
Yeah, and keep your digestive system healthy.
Yep.
For so you can absorb things.
Yep.
So, it all comes back down to those basic things.
And understand the medications you're on. If you're on a medication that can cause problems with this, that's when you may want to supplement with MTHF.
Yeah, but not not MTHFR, MTHF. See, it's easy to...
Oh, no, it's easy. I stopped at the F. The R is the reductase bit.
That's right, that's the enzyme. And also supplements without the folic acid in it.
Exactly. And so many supplements have got folic acid in it.
Yeah.
So many foods have got folic acid added to it. Isn't it incredible that we have this take about these sorts of things? Now, what is there any sort of take-home messages you'd give someone who is suspecting that they may have either one of these conditions that's contributing to one of these things? What would you do?
Yeah, well, look, it's definitely worthwhile to get yourself tested, whether you've got an MTHFR polymorphism, and maybe you want to look at other genes as well.
Yep.
That's specific to your condition. And then you also want to maybe get some labs done to see, if you are actually expressing it. You want to maybe check your red blood cell folate. Are you actually getting enough folate in? There's other tests like organic acid testing where you can measure uracil and thiamine, which is a great way of also measuring expression of MTHFR. And I think that's the important thing. Like I've treated many clients who have the MTHFR polymorphism, but they were not expressing it, and vice versa, those who didn't have the polymorphism, but they were expressing it.
Yes.
So it's very valuable to do both, not just do a gene and then decide I'm going to take a supplement based on the gene, but see first if you are actually expressing it.
Yep, and measure homocysteine levels in the blood.
That's a very good one to measure. Yep, homocysteine.
Now the reason why I like that one is it's bulk.
Yeah, it's easy.
You can get that one to test. But homocysteine is an amino acid, potentially toxic. So just so people know what that is. So get tested. Okay, let's say that they're homozygous. They've got them both. Supplement healthy. Don't eat folic acid and live a healthy life and enjoy what you've got. Enjoy your extra strength and your extra speed. That's what I reckon. I wouldn't mind that. Now, I know the negatives, risks, all this nasties, but I like the extra strength and speed. Well, I think we better wrap up now after that, I think.
I think so. Leave it on a high note, Steve.
Yeah, a really high note. Look, thanks for listening. This is an amazing, gene that we can actually test for. We know it's been well researched, and I think that if everybody is aware of this gene, so as then I think that you can still live a very healthy life. You've got this polymorphism.
Absolutely.
You got any final words to say?
I think you summed it up.
All right, good.
Yep.
Well, we'll see you all next week and have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.